So, I've been talking a lot about logistics, and as I did earlier this week with our exploration into UNSC logistics, we're branching out from Star Wars and talking about a few other science fiction franchises. So today I figured I'd talk about a franchise that I haven't talked about in quite a while, and it's one that I hold very dear, so I figured today we'll talk about the MCRN from the Expanse and how they kept their fleets supplied and their forces supplied, operating throughout the solar system. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, the MCRN was one of the most powerful naval forces in the solar system by the time of the UN-MCR War, and they saw operations all across the solar system from the inner planets to the outer planets, and while most of that was in the outer planets, it wasn't exclusively in that area of the system. So I figured today we could talk about how they supplied their fleets, because we actually do have a pretty good picture of how they did it. And it's something that will be pretty familiar to those of you who have an idea for how naval supply works in the real world. But before we talk about supplying their fleets, let's talk briefly about moving troops. Now, anyone who's seen The Expanse knows that troops are not necessarily that big of a deal in The Expanse. Well, Marines definitely have their place. Large planetary invasions are fairly impractical, and we don't necessarily see large ground-based military operations very often. Small strike teams, sure, but large ground-based operations seem to be completely gone. That being said, there is an MCRN vessel that is a troop transport, the Shurocco class. The Shurocco class is formally classified as an assault cruiser, which denotes a responsibility for moving troops around and carrying out ground assaults, which is something that when we look at the design of the vessel, it's clearly designed to be capable of doing. It has a whole section of it that's designed to dock these chariot-type landing craft, which we see MCRN Marines use on multiple occasions to land at designated landing sites. Now, I don't think the number of landing craft here are capable of carrying out things like a planetary invasion, but small strike teams that need to insert and take out a target for a larger orbital strike is a viable use for these teams. So for moving troops around the solar system, the MCRN simply stationed Marines on board vessels and would focus on large transport vessels like the Shurocco class. But since most of the infantry combat has sort of been, I don't want to say lost to time, but has sort of faded in favor of larger space combat, how do you keep those naval vessels supplied? Because they still need supplies. They need ammunition for both their PDCs, their railguns, and their torpedoes. They need food and water for their crew. So how do you supply a naval fleet? Well, it works very similar to the way the United States Navy operates their carrier strike groups. You have your core section of combat vessels. In the MCRN, this would be something like a Doniger-class battleship escorted by a few Shuroccos, and maybe a number of smaller vessels like Corvette-class frigates or Morrigan-class patrol destroyers. Now, this is a very formidable naval force that is capable of taking on most other naval task groups, but is going to be relatively resource-hungry, and as such, the MCRN does have a dedicated supply ship, the D-class supply vessel. And we actually do see one in the show. The Barke is a D-class supply vessel that's designated for resupplying MCRN fleets. And while we see it serving the Free Navy and the Laconian Navy later on in the show, it was originally designed to serve as a resupply vessel for fleets, in a very similar way that a U.S. strike carrier group is followed by a supply ship to provide those vessels with supplies, whether they need fuel or food or ammunition or whatnot. They could be stored on the supply ship, which could be kept a little bit further back during combat and then brought up when resupply is needed. Now, it's worth noting that the D-class supply ship is not completely unarmed. It does have a small complement of torpedoes and PDCs to protect itself, but its primary role was resupplying other ships in the fleet, something that it was designed from the ground up to do. Now, that's for supplying large naval forces, but what about smaller MCRN outposts scattered across the solar system? How would they get resupplied? Well, I have a theory on that, and it's not entirely confirmed, but stick with me on this. When we look around something like the Rocinante, which was originally the Tachi, a Corvette-class frigate, we notice it has a fairly large cargo bay for a ship of its size. This, to me, makes me think that these small vessels, the Morgan and Corvette classes, were likely used as small resupply vessels for facilities occasionally. The need for that large of a cargo bay suggests that it could be used for transporting cargo, so I could see these smaller naval vessels being dispatched to MCRN facilities across the solar system to deliver supplies on a relatively regular basis. Added benefit that these vessels are combat vessels, and as such are capable of defending themselves if need be. These same processes could be used to resupply small scout fleets. For example, we know in a lot of cases Morgan-class patrol destroyers were sent out on their own to carry out their own scouting missions, so I could see them having to rendezvous with, say, a Corvette-class frigate that was shuttling around supplies to various scout forces that would simply be just loaded through that docking tunnel we see them use time and time again. But in most cases, supplying MCRN naval forces would fall to larger supply ships like the D-class supply vessel. If you'd like to learn about what makes a D-class supply vessel so unique, learn about its weapons and its equipment and how it was employed specifically, that type of vessel, I'll leave a link up here to a video I made a while back breaking down the D-class, its role in the MCRN, and how it would be used. I'll talk about its weapons and its history. And I'd like to let me know down in the comments whether you think they did use the smaller vessels like the Morgan class and the Corvette class as resupply vessels, or do you think those really were dedicated combat vessels designed to fill light escort roles, which they clearly were designed to do, but do you think they also filled supply roles? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in The Expanse, or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.